and welcome to the 10th episode of the Marketing Meeting. My guest today is Clay Ostrom. Clay is a brand strategist. He is the founder of Map&Fire, a Los Angeles-based brand and marketing consultancy. We're going to talk about brand data today. What's brand data? Why it's critical for brands? What's the difference between big data and brand data? Because these are two different things. And how can we collect and interpret that data? I hope you enjoyed the chat. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the Marketing Meeting, Clay. So you were supposed to be my second guest on the show back in October 2021, but due to a few obstacles, here we are. I'm recording the 10th episode, and actually, on the bright side, this is the first recording of 2021. 2022, actually. I'm still back in the last year.
Yeah.
So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was excited to be one of your first guests then, and now I can just be one of your first 2022 guests. So just as good.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about brand data, but before we jump into that, I would like to hear a little bit about your story, because when I look to your bio and to your background, I know that before brand strategy, you did many things, from being a developer, an executive producer, a copywriter, a designer, if I don't forget anything. How did you end up in brand strategy at the end of the day?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about that myself sometimes. Yeah, I've always sort of thought of myself as being a little bit of a split personality when it comes to my interests and maybe some of my skills and stuff. And there's always been kind of a divide between some of the more, analytical type things that I've been interested in, and that goes into background in computer science and wanting to, really being drawn to the idea of building things, building products, understanding how things work. But then alongside that, I've always had a very creative side as well. I've always loved writing. I have, some background in art and design and stuff too. And so over the years, I think I've kind of taken some twists and turns around, where my career has gone, leaning into one side or the other. Mm-hmm. And when I really dug into brand strategy, it kind of presented this really sort of beautiful marriage of these two sides for me, where I felt like it was a really big problem to solve. It was a great thing to kind of pull apart and understand, technically how it works. But then there's also this great sort of creative expression side of it too, where we're coming up with amazing visuals and messages and like all kinds of stuff.
Today, we're going to talk about brand data. I know that this is a topic that you've been focusing a lot lately. Mm-hmm. Can you please tell me a bit more about what's brand data? Because I know that it's different from big data that everybody's talking about. Mm-hmm. Can you please explain it?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, like, to help frame this question a little bit, that it would probably be good to talk just for a minute about brand as a whole. And not to kind of turn the tables on you, but I know you also, you've worked with all kinds of companies, like massive corporations and also like smaller businesses. And I would love to hear your thoughts first on how do you think of brand? Because I think it's one of these terms that gets used in so many different ways, and people have so many different perspectives on what it is or isn't. And I'd be really curious to hear first, like, not to flip it on you, but like, just like, how do you sort of think about brand? Like, what does that mean to you?
Well, thank you very much for,
I promise I'll respond too. I was just curious to hear you.
No, I worked for like almost 2 decades at one of the biggest global brands of today, which is Nike. And there it was mainly about, brand, building the brand, investing in the brand. And then, each season we were talking about landing the big planes, which is like there's an innovation coming up, and then every sales force, every marketing force are, putting their efforts to launch that product. So, and that comes with continuing and sustaining the brand itself. Now I'm just back. Now I'm first of all building my own business, which is completely a different thing. I'm also doing marketing consultancy. And now I'm working with like smaller size brands or medium size brands, which are completely different because they are trying to set something completely from scratch. And although some of the tactics and strategies are different for big brands and smaller brands, but in terms of the dynamics, in terms of where we are trying to head, I think it's very similar. At the end of the day, we are trying to put a mental image in a consumer's or in a person's mind. So we are trying to create a mental availability in somebody's mind, and we are trying to shape that identity in that person's, on that prospect's mind. So I think brand is the identity that has been shaped in people's minds and hearts. That's what I see.
I completely agree. I think, there's sort of like the very common misconception of brand as being just sort of this more superficial aspect of what a business does. And, obviously people think about different touch points like their identity and like their logo and like these different things. But just like you just said, I think of brand as being this much more holistic thing. It's really kind of encompassing all aspects of what a business does. And, and that goes as deep and as big as sort of their core purpose and the values they represent, to thinking about their positioning in the market, how they connect with customers, what needs they're solving, how they differentiate themselves. And then also that communication, how do they then, put that message out in a way that is engaging for people, like taps into their emotions, is easy to remember, that they can trust, all of these things. So I just think, I thought it was good to kind of like sort of talk about that big picture, because, if we're going to talk about data related to brand, then, we need to kind of think about, well, kind of what falls into that category, what falls into the brand category. And I think as we'll kind of dig into this a little more, to me, it covers a lot. Like, again, it almost covers just about every aspect that you can think of that sort of affects the business in some way. I would sort of classify as being part of brand data. In terms of how we think about it or work on it with my agency, we sort of have, at least I sort of think about it in two buckets. So one is sort of more like what I would call more like micro-focused data. So meaning it's focused on a specific customer or specific client or specific business that we're working with. So we're, really trying to understand their specific needs, their specific customers, how they fit in the market. And then there's a sort of a more macro level side of data that we're investing a lot more in right now. And that's where we're looking more like at the greater marketplace, looking at, trends and things like that across lots and lots of like thousands of companies to say, what are the different ways that they're positioning themselves, or what are the different ways that they're communicating with their customers, so that we can kind of extract insights from that to help inform strategic decisions and stuff. So that's kind of like the two main separators, I guess, of how we're thinking about data right now.
What are those data sets? I mean, for example, for on the macro level data, what are the things that you are looking into? What are the KPIs or topics that you are looking into?
Yeah, so I heard this, I was listening to another interview earlier last year with a guy named Udi Lediger, he's the CMO of a company called Gong. I don't know if you've heard of Gong, but they're they've grown a ton. I mean, they haven't been around that long. I think they've been around for maybe 6 or 7 years now, but they are a B2B company, SaaS company that's focused on sales. So they help companies kind of understand their sales process better and refine it. And in this interview, Udi was talking about when he first came into the company, how they were trying to establish their brand and really thinking about kind of their position in the market. And they spent a lot of time sort of looking at the competitive landscape and sort of saying, well, what are all of these other competitors that we have? What are they doing? Or what are companies that, are at the level we're trying to get to, like, what are they doing? And, he called out at one point in the interview that, they noticed that a lot of Series A companies, like companies that have reached a certain level of venture funding, they all seem to use the same color blue. They all seem to present their products in the same way, where they show kind of a screen capture of the user interface, and it just kind of, it doesn't have any emotional connection. It just sort of, presents the product, very plainly. And anyway, they really tried to, in every different aspect of communication, see if they could kind of go the opposite, see if they could say, well, rather than this Series A blue, their main color is purple, which is sort of a little different. And I know we're talking about kind of sort of superficial identity stuff here, and there's obviously a deeper level here, but they also really wanted to focus on showing people, and not just showing stock imagery of people, but showing real customers and showing people using the product and trying to, capture that connection. But anyway, the reason I bring up this interview was, I think it's a great example of how it's very helpful to have data, sort of macro level data, to help inform these kinds of decisions about positioning and how we represent ourselves visually and how we communicate with customers. And sometimes it's so we can, skew the opposite direction. Like if we see a trend of, oh, everybody, in our space is kind of doing the same thing, maybe we can try something different. But it's also, I think, helps us understand, what do customers expect? What do our customers expect to hear from a company of this size or of this type, so that we can, not necessarily completely violate those expectations, but maybe violate them in certain strategic ways, so you can kind of find a balance between, hitting on things that your customers expect to help build trust, but also separating yourself and differentiating yourself so they can remember you too. So sorry, I know that was a little bit of a tangent, and I'm not sure where we started with that question, but
No, I just wanted to deep dive on the macro level data, because when we think about data, for me personally, when somebody says data, I'm just thinking about an Excel sheet with like numbers on it, which actually apparently data is any type of indicator. For example, like all the A series, as you said, all the A series startups are using a blue color, techno blue color, whereas they use this is a data too, right? That's what I'm trying to get there. So I just wanted to make sure that people understand that differentiation. When we talk about data, it's not the data, just like the numerical data. It's any type of indicator for a brand or for a marketplace, I guess, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think, when we're sort of collecting data, we're collecting a lot of different types of data. And some of it, like you said, is numbers driven and sort of more analytical. And, we use tools, of course, like we're always looking at things like some of the basic stuff like Google Analytics. We want to understand, the volume of visitors and the time spent on the site and kind of some of those things. But then there's other, we're also doing, customer interviews, and we're getting more qualitative type data, and we're like listening to how people answer questions about, their needs, and trying to understand some of the emotion that's connected with their decision-making process, and some of those things are not so easily quantified. Some of those things have to be interpreted and, listened to and digested. And so we're doing a mix. We're doing, everything again from customer interviews to surveys where we can get a little more quantitative with responses from certain customer segments. And then, like I said, using tools like Google Analytics, and also using tools like in the SEO space, using a tool like Ahrefs, where we can look at the competitive landscape, see what kind of content lots of other companies are using, so that you can see how to connect with your customers that way. So it is definitely a mix of stuff. It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet. Although sometimes those numbers on a spreadsheet are really helpful especially when you're looking at like a big set of data, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there is a professor in Australia. His name is Byron Sharp. I was reading his article this weekend, and then he wrote that brand marketers, actually, they need to have a knowledge on business. I mean, they need to be business people. Because at the end of the day, the things that you told me, like, collecting the customer insight, collecting Google Insights, collecting the sales data, and it's like at the end of the day, you're just taking a snapshot from like the bird eye, right? And you are looking to the business in every aspect, but also focusing especially on the product, customer, and the marketing side. So I think that's, thinking about brand data, not only as numbers on an Excel sheet, as I mentioned, but as a snapshot of the overall business, by being focused on the brand itself. I think that's a correct approach, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you hit on something really important there, which is, customers at sort of the central point of, most of the decisions that we're making as a business and thinking about as a brand really do in a lot of ways come back to, customers and understanding what are their behaviors, what are their motivations, what outcomes are they seeking, what do they value in a solution. If the more you can understand that, and again, it affects sales numbers, it affects, engagement, it affects the whole journey of how people become aware of your brand, and then hopefully become engaged and eventually, convert into an actual customer, a buying customer from you. It all kind of comes back to that. But I agree, it's very much related to the business. And that's why I think, again, when we talk about brand, it's not some silo or some kind of separate thing from the business. It really is this umbrella, this thing that kind of encapsulates everything that you're doing as a business.
Once we collect the data and we have all the things that we have, we interviewed the customer, we did the Google Analytics checks, and we just checked social media and blogs, forums, and see what our people are talking about on this about this product and about the service. And then from there, what do we do?
Yeah, well, that is where a certain level of, I guess, expertise and experience needs to come in, because just like you said, collecting the data is one thing, like identifying the problem is one thing, saying like, okay, here's an area where we want to improve. And then saying, well, what kind of data could we collect around that is sort of like the next step. And then actually doing that and like building up some amount of data around that. And then that last piece really is sort of the, what insights can we extract from this? What can we pull from this to help inform decisions, better decisions for our business? And, that piece is a little harder to, I think, give general advice about, but I think it's sort of, as much as possible, hopefully as you're collecting the data, you're targeting it as much as possible at those specific learnings that you're trying to, understand better. So if you've done a good job of kind of crafting your data collection, hopefully there are some natural insights that kind of bubble up out of that, like if you asked a specific question about, well, we're really trying to understand, what do our customers value most about our product or service? Are they really focused just on price, or, are there some higher level value pieces that they care about? Like we're providing strategic guidance to them, and we're providing, we're helping to kind of reduce their anxiety and worry about things. Maybe they care about those things a little bit more than just the bottom line price. And we're trying to tease that apart, and so hopefully you can kind of be, constructing your data collection around some of those things so that when you get the information back, you can say, oh, look, like they actually ranked price as like the third most important thing, that they care about. It's not like the top of the list, like we maybe thought before. But then there are other more creative insights, I think, that you can pull out of data that, again, it helps to have somebody who has been through that process a bunch of times and can help kind of spot the opportunities around things and kind of see data in a creative way. I think that's something that just comes somewhat through experience. Again, I don't think it means you have to have a specialist degree or be like a hardcore data analyst, which obviously for some of the big data stuff, like you kind of do need some of those skills. But I think for small and medium-sized businesses, I think there's tons of stuff you can analyze and get insights out of that doesn't require, hardcore data, analysis to get at. So.
I mean, it's like, as I mentioned, it's like doing a checkup on a person, and then you can diagnose maybe 10 things, 10 problems in a person's body, but you don't necessarily need to treat all of the 10, right? You just decide that you just want to focus on the 3-4 most important things. It's just like for the brands. I mean, once you diagnose the pain points and the things that you can improve after collecting all the data, then it comes up to, okay, what are the most important ones that we are going to focus on? Because, knowing your problem is one thing, but trying to solve all these problems are another thing, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way of thinking about it, is which of these challenges will most impact the business, or maybe to put it another way, if we don't understand this point, which of these points would most like prohibit us from growing if we can't understand this point better, about who our customers are, or our position in the competitive landscape, or whatever it is. Because I agree. I think obviously the danger with data is you can sort of end up with that, paralysis of analysis kind of thing, and you sort of end up with like, we've got so many things we could potentially do, and there's a little bit of a focusing in that needs to happen to make sure you're not kind of getting lost in the data. Because again, like we said, like data is just a tool. It's just there to help improve decision making and inform, decisions, and provide those insights. It's not the answer to everything. I think you still need, luckily for now, until the computers and the robots take over completely, like we still need our brains and our decision making, and the data is just there to help improve it, not to replace it, in my opinion.
Is there one last question about this? I mean, because now we talked a lot about data and how it's important for brands, and how it can also paralyze brands in terms of analytics and so on. So we are now as two marketers, we can talk about the new year, which is 2022. This just came up to my mind. What do you think? I mean, I don't want to call it trends, but what do you see changing in marketing? Because every year it's shifting and evolving a lot. But what do you think about? I mean, do you have any thoughts about 2022?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of rapid shifts around this space. I think, what's exciting to me is, first and foremost, I think it's exciting that people are getting much more savvy about understanding brand and the need for, again, a holistic view of what their brand is and kind of what that actually means. I think that has increased a lot. I mean, and again, this is somewhat anecdotal, but just in terms of the people we talk to, I feel like more and more we're talking to businesses that recognize a real need around their brand and their brand strategy and making improvements around that. So that's exciting. I think of course, the sophistication around the data that we can collect and the access to that. Again, this is no longer just the realm of the big giant corporations. I mean, businesses of all sizes now can collect all kinds of data, fairly inexpensively. This is not something that is, has to be, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment. I mean, there are things you can do really quickly for not a lot of money to kind of get, really important insights. So I think that's really interesting. And then, in terms of like maybe a more, I don't know, a slightly newer trend or way of thinking about this stuff is almost a little bit, maybe going against the data a little bit of saying, recognizing that data is not perfect and understanding that, the way people buy things and sort of the journey that people go from becoming aware of your brand to actually becoming a paying customer is sometimes a very weird winding path. It's not so simple. We like to think of it as just like it's a funnel and we have people at the top and they slowly work their way down and they become aware and engaged and convert, and that happens. I mean, of course that does happen, but I think there's a lot of interesting discussion right now, I think, around attribution models and how we can track people, or in some cases that we can't track people, completely, their behaviors, and that we still need to invest in things from a brand perspective. A perfect example is like this, like doing a podcast where you may have listeners out there, people you connect with who, hear a conversation that you had, and then maybe they download another episode, maybe they subscribe, maybe they hear some story that you mentioned in an episode and they look something up, and then they come back to you again, a month later and read a blog article you wrote. And then a month after that, they download a white paper that you wrote about, marketing trends. And then finally, they decide to reach out to you because they happen to have a need at that time. And, from your perspective, maybe from a brand data perspective, you might see, oh, we've got more podcast listeners. Oh, someone downloaded an article. Someone downloaded our white paper. Oh, we have a new visitor on our site who wants to talk to us, and never know that these things are all connected and it's all like the same person, So again, I think there's just like some interesting discussion around that of saying, we need to invest in things as a brand in terms of how we communicate and reach people, and maybe accept the fact that the data is not always going to be able to tie all this stuff together perfectly, but that doesn't mean that, the data is not important. It just means that it's not perfect. And, we just have to recognize that people are weird, complex beings who do weird, complex things that are sometimes unpredictable.
Exactly, because we sometimes assume that, I'm against any type of generalization, because as human beings, we try to simplify and generalize stuff and put rules behind it so that, it's in our DNA, right? That's how we survived for centuries, because we simplify things and we put general rules and ideas behind. But the thing is that, as you said, the customer journey is not that simple. It's like sometimes it's so weird for every single person that you cannot really understand it. But the thing is, you have to make sure that at all these touch points, you have to put some efforts to be there. You have to be available on those touch points so that at least if you are not catching the availability at the store, for example, at the physical location, you just catch them at from online or from the newspaper or from the friend. And at the end of the day, this changes from brand to brand, from product to product, from service to service, because we cannot say that sports retail is the same as cosmetics, it has different dynamics, and we cannot generalize what works for cosmetics brands can work for sports brands, which some of the things may overlap, but it's not as simple as that. I think we need to, what I see is that I think people understand that generalizations are not the solution to some of the marketing concepts. And on the other thing, for example, for 2022, I have I have a few predictions already, although I'm not like the guru or whatever, but as a person doing marketing.
No, bring it, lay it on us. I want to know what's going to happen. I don't I don't want to have to wait.
Yeah, the thing is like the privacy. I mean, like we have all the data. Now we don't have all the data. I mean, it's just like if you don't have the zero party, which is like your own data, it doesn't make any sense. Even if you have the own data, you own the data, then there are the rules of privacy, security that you have to go. I mean, like, I think this year, I know that Google has announced that it's going to be 2023, that they're going to get rid of the cookies. So we still have a year ahead, but we will need to figure out what we are going to do with these cookies. I mean, we have been using retargeting, remarketing, and all the third-party data. That's one thing. But the other thing, data and privacy, we all know that is coming up. That's going to be an issue. But the other thing is that I think with all the brand purpose, brand blueprint, customers and people understand that this is important. They would like to get more from the brands. So, and now brands are at the stage that, okay, we have to have a brand purpose. But then they think that is something that is a software that they need to apply to the business to make things more successful. But it's not that, actually. I think there's too much jargons and fake identities revolving around the brand purpose thing. So it's a very thin line. I mean, if you just do brand purpose because that you think people are trying to buy from brands with purpose, then it's not going to work. I think that's going to be a year that the discussions around brand purpose, ESG, like sustainability, environment, it's going to, I mean, many brands will try and fail because if you are using those efforts like environmental, sustainability, or purpose-wise efforts in order to increase brand awareness or to increase brand share, that's not going to work. I mean, like, for example, at Nike, I really admire how they approach this. Sustainability or all the non-governmental stuff or any type of environmental efforts, they are handled by completely different department than marketing, and marketing has no say to it. And they don't want to use it for PR purposes. I mean, of course, these are under discussions and they do press releases if they do anything around that, but they put it completely in a separate category. I mean, they just don't touch it. I mean, you cannot use anything related to that in your marketing messaging. So I think that's something that's going to evolve in 2022 too.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you hit on a lot of really interesting things there. And I would say, just quickly, I would say, your point about sort of being everywhere, and being able to touch the different places your customer may want to engage with you, I think is very true. And what I would add to that is the consistency of how you represent the brand in all those different touch points is so important. And that's why, investing in your brand and investing in really defining how you position yourself and how you communicate is so important, because like you said, whether it's, a social channel or, a piece of sales collateral or a conversation, you want all of those things to feel like they're coming from the same place and, telling the same story. And I think that's getting harder and harder, these days, because we are spread out across so many different types of mediums and forms. So I thought that was really interesting. And also your point about privacy, I think, is really interesting because, like you said, there's already been shifts. There's going to continue to be shifts around how we can, some of the data that we can collect around people. And that's going to make it that much more important to really understand your customers personally, or from your business's perspective, and just have a clear point of view about how you communicate, your value. And we're going to have to just rely more and more on some of those fundamental principles of how we connect with people. And it's going to be less about, well, we just retargeted you, 100 times and until we kind of beat you into submission to kind of finally come to our site. So yeah, I think all of that stuff is super, super interesting. And then the last point about purpose, we got to do a really interesting engagement this past year where we had an opportunity to talk to like CMOs and, chief human resource leaders at some really big, like Fortune 100 type companies. And we were specifically talking about purpose. It was kind of coming out of 2020 and, some of the big changes that we've all experienced. I mean, across the board. I mean, not just COVID, but all kinds of social issues. And I think big companies are really recognizing the value of purpose and the importance of it, and recognizing that their employees and their customers really care about these things on a very deep level, and they impact, their buying decisions. They impact, employment decisions of who which companies you might want to work for. But I also agree with what you're saying, that it's like, it's a thin line. It's like people kind of want to just jump on that bandwagon and say like, oh, well, we just need a purpose. Like, we'll just come up with a purpose and then we can tell everybody about our purpose. And it's really, for it to be meaningful, it's much deeper than that. And it's really meant to be something that fundamentally drives how you operate. And, your core values aren't some words on a poster on a wall in a break room. I mean, they should be, that's how your employees should be judged in terms of their performance, that are evaluated in terms of their performance. And creating that consistency and enforcing those good ideals is so important. But it's got to be a real thing. It's got to be something that you actually do, not just talk about, for sure.
Exactly. Clay, thanks so much for being a part of it. We hope to do it as the second episode, but here we are at the 10th episode. But we did it finally. So can you please tell where listeners can find you? Is it LinkedIn or? Yeah.
I mean, probably the best place to look is just our website. Map&Fire is the name of the company, and so the URL is just mapandfire.com. And we have all kinds of resources. We really try to invest in providing access to resources so that businesses of all levels can, get the types of tools they need to grow. So there's all kinds of free stuff on there, 100+ blog articles on everything you could possibly want to nerd out about brand and marketing is in there. So yeah, lots of good stuff on there. I think that's probably the best place to go if you want to learn more.
Yeah. And actually I also find you from Map&Fire, because it's a huge resource for really good and valuable content. I'm still using some of the information when I was building up my own business, although I know about brand strategy, marketing strategy. I mean, all the tools that you provide is so generous and so valuable that even as a brand marketer, I'm using some of them. So, I mean, I really, suggest that people, if they're interested in marketing, just check out the mapandfire.com website. Oh. Thanks so much for being here. And I hope to see you in real life, maybe in a couple of weeks. You never know.
I know. I would love to make that happen. That would be very exciting. Thank you so much. It was really super fun, as always, to talk to you. So thank you for having me.